I tightened my grip around the cream-colored invitation as I stepped into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. String music drifted through the room. Everywhere I looked, men and women in tailored suits laughed with champagne glasses in their hands. Judges, senior partners, prosecutors. Almost every face belonged to someone from the legal world my family worshipped. I'd barely taken 3 steps before a familiar voice cut through the room. "What is this failure doing here?" Conversation stopped. My father, Richard Bennett, stood near the center of the reception, his tuxedo immaculate, his expression unchanged from the last time I'd seen him 8 years earlier. Cold, disappointed, ashamed. He stared at me as though I'd tracked mud across the ballroom floor. "What," he repeated louder, "is this pathetic college dropout doing at my son's wedding?" Several guests turned toward me. I recognized a few faces immediately. Partners from my father's law firm, retired judges, family friends, people who had once watched me grow up believing I'd become the next Bennett attorney. Now they looked at me with polite curiosity. Or pity. Andrew appeared beside our father, laughing under his breath. "I knew she'd pull something like this," he said, shaking his head. "Security." 2 attendants immediately approached. "My brother's wedding isn't open to strangers," Andrew said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She wasn't invited." A ripple of whispers spread across the ballroom. "That's the daughter who dropped out. I heard she disappeared." What a shame. I could have answered. I could have shown them the invitation already resting in my hand. Instead, I simply looked at my father. 8 years. Not one phone call. Not one birthday. Not one question about why I'd left law school. Only one verdict. Failure. Andrew folded his arms with a smug smile. "You've embarrassed this family enough," he said. "Don't make today about yourself." One of the security attendants stepped forward politely. "Ma'am, may I see your invitation?" Without saying a word, I handed it over. Before he could even unfold it, another sharp voice came from behind the crowd. "Excuse me." The ballroom grew strangely quiet. The bride stood several feet away, still in her wedding gown. Her eyes settled on me. For a single second, she froze. Then her expression changed completely. She looked from me, to my father, to Andrew, and asked, her voice suddenly firm, "What exactly is happening here?" The bride's question hung over the ballroom like a gavel waiting to fall. Before anyone answered, my mind carried me back 8 years, to the day my family decided I no longer belonged to them. I had been halfway through my 2nd year of law school when my life changed in a single afternoon. The details never mattered to my father. Only the outcome did. When I withdrew from the program, he didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't ask if something had happened. He simply stared at the withdrawal papers lying on his mahogany desk. "You've disgraced this family." Those were the first words out of his mouth. I remember trying to explain. "Dad, I just need some time." "You need discipline." "I'll find another way." "There is no other way." He pushed the papers back across the desk. "Every Bennett before you earned respect in a courtroom. You chose failure." That evening, dinner felt less like a family meal and more like a disciplinary hearing. Andrew leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. I always knew law school would separate the serious people from the pretenders. My mother lowered her eyes, but never challenged him. No one did. Dad lifted his wine glass. "Fortunately, one of my children still understands what this family's name means." He nodded toward Andrew. "My successor." No one looked at me. No one asked if I was all right. By the following week, my framed acceptance letter from law school had disappeared from the hallway beside Andrew's academic awards. Family gatherings slowly stopped including me. Birthday invitations never arrived. Holiday dinners happened without a phone call. When clients visited my parents' home, Dad introduced Andrew proudly. "This is my only child carrying on the Bennett legacy." The first time I heard those words from someone else, I realized he had been saying them for months. I packed my apartment 2 days later. No dramatic goodbye. No argument. Just 2 suitcases, a used sedan, and enough savings to rent a tiny studio across the state. My first job wasn't glamorous. I spent 10 hours a day reviewing financial records inside a corporate compliance office where nobody cared that I'd once studied law. Boxes of invoices, bank statements, contracts. Most people found them painfully boring. I found patterns, tiny inconsistencies others ignored, missing transfers, hidden accounts, fake vendors. My supervisor noticed. "You think like an attorney," she told me one afternoon. I smiled politely. "I used to want to become one." She handed me a thicker investigation file. "Good. Why?" "Because investigators who understand the law are harder to fool." That single opportunity changed everything. Months became years. Small internal audits became major corporate investigations. My reports grew longer. The companies grew larger. The fraud schemes became more sophisticated. My name almost never appeared publicly. That was part of the job. The investigations mattered. Recognition didn't. 8 years passed. Not once did my father call to ask where I was. Not once did Andrew wonder what I'd become. Then, 1 month before the wedding, an elegant envelope arrived at my apartment. There was no Bennett return address. Only my name, handwritten in graceful script. Inside was a formal invitation. Not from my father. Not from Andrew. From the bride herself. At the bottom, beneath the printed invitation, she'd written one sentence in blue ink. "I sincerely hope you'll come. It would mean more than you realize." I stared at those words for a long time. I hadn't spoken to her more than twice in my life. So why? After 8 years of silence, was she inviting the one Bennett everyone else had erased? I looked at the bride without saying a word. She looked back at me as though she'd just found the one person she'd been hoping would arrive. My father stepped between us. "I'm sorry you had to see this, Claire," he said with an embarrassed laugh. "My daughter has always struggled with boundaries." Andrew nodded confidently. She wasn't invited. Several guests murmured in agreement. Someone near the back whispered, "So she really crashed her own brother's wedding." The security attendant unfolded the invitation in his hands. Before he could read it, Andrew reached over and snatched it away. His eyes scanned the card for less than 2 seconds before he laughed. "This has to be fake." He held it high enough for nearby guests to see. "She probably printed this herself." The accusation spread through the crowd almost instantly. "I knew it. That's desperate. I can't believe she'd do this." I stayed exactly where I was. Claire finally spoke. "May I see the invitation?" Andrew hesitated. Then, still smiling, he handed it to her. She read it once. Then she turned it over. Her expression became noticeably colder. She looked directly at Andrew. "Did you just accuse my guest of forgery?" The smile disappeared from his face. Well, you answered my question." Richard stepped forward smoothly. "Claire, you've only met Meghan a few times. You don't know the history." "I know enough," Claire replied calmly. "No," Richard said, "you don't." He lowered his voice, just enough to sound sympathetic. "She dropped out of law school, disappeared for years, and cut herself off from this family. We simply don't want unnecessary drama on Andrew's wedding day." Several guests nodded. His version sounded perfectly reasonable. Claire slowly closed the invitation. "I wrote this." Silence. Every nearby conversation stopped. She held up the invitation so everyone could see the handwritten note beneath her signature. I addressed this personally. The security attendants immediately stepped back from me. Andrew frowned. There has to be some misunderstanding. There isn't. Richard forced another smile. I'm sure Meghan somehow convinced you. Claire interrupted him. No. She looked directly into his eyes. I invited her because I wanted one of the most respected professionals I've ever met standing beside my family today. The words landed like a stone in still water. Confused whispers erupted around the ballroom. What professional? Who is she talking about? One older attorney studying me suddenly narrowed his eyes. Wait. He looked at me again. Then at Claire. Then back at me. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. He whispered to the woman beside him. That can't possibly be. Across the room, another senior lawyer quietly pulled out his phone. Within seconds, a third attorney did the same. The mood in the ballroom changed. People weren't staring at me because I was the family embarrassment anymore. They were trying to remember where they'd heard my name before. Richard noticed it. So did Andrew. Neither understood why. Claire walked directly toward me. Without hesitation, she slipped her arm through mine. Then she turned to face the hundreds of guests gathered inside the ballroom. If you'll excuse us, she said clearly, I'd like everyone to meet someone very important before tonight's celebration continues. She gently led me toward the front of the reception hall. Behind us, I heard my father call out for the first time with uncertainty in his voice. Claire. But she never stopped walking. Claire stopped beside the head table and accepted the microphone from the wedding coordinator. The quiet conversations faded almost instantly. I know everyone is eager to celebrate, she began, but before dinner is served, there's someone I need to thank. Andrew forced a nervous smile. Claire, this really isn't necessary. She looked at him briefly. It absolutely is. She turned back toward the guests. Many of you know my father nearly lost everything 6 years ago. Several heads nodded. The case had dominated legal headlines for months. Richard folded his arms. It was unfortunate, he muttered. Claire continued. Our company was accused of orchestrating a massive financial fraud. Another attorney added quietly. I remember that investigation. So do I, someone else replied. The evidence looked overwhelming. Claire nodded. It did. My father hired one of the largest litigation firms in the state. She glanced toward Richard. They worked tirelessly. Richard gave a polite smile, assuming she was complimenting the legal profession. They built an excellent defense, he said confidently. Claire didn't acknowledge him. But something was still missing. She paused. The evidence proving my father's innocence. The ballroom became completely silent. Our attorneys couldn't find it because someone had buried the truth beneath thousands of financial transactions. She looked toward me. One investigator found what no one else could. Andrew shifted uneasily. Claire continued. She reconstructed years of accounting records. She uncovered shell companies. She identified the real fraud network. And because of her work, she looked toward her father, seated near the front. My father walked out of court an innocent man. Her father slowly stood. His voice carried genuine emotion. I owe my business and my family's future to that investigator. Guests applauded politely. Richard smiled again. She certainly deserves recognition. Claire nodded. She does. Then she turned toward me. And she's standing beside me. Hundreds of eyes shifted in my direction. The applause stopped. No one moved. Richard frowned. What? Claire smiled warmly. That investigator was Meghan Bennett. A ripple of disbelief spread across the ballroom. Several attorneys immediately recognized the name. Oh my God. It is her. I've read her reports. I've cited her investigations. I attended a seminar based on one of her forensic methodologies. Another attorney stepped forward. Ms. Bennett. He extended his hand. It's an honor to finally meet you. Within seconds, more lawyers approached. One after another. Not because I had won court cases. Because my investigations had become required reading for complex corporate fraud litigation. Richard watched silently. His expression slowly shifted from confusion to disbelief, to horror. He looked at me as though he were seeing me for the first time. Andrew quietly pulled out his phone. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen. A few seconds later, all the color drained from his face. His wife leaned toward him. What is it? He swallowed. There are dozens of published case analyses. He scrolled faster. National conferences. Professional awards. Court citations. His voice became almost inaudible. These are all hers. Richard reached for the phone. Andrew handed it over without speaking. My father stared at the screen. Every article. Every conference. Every commendation. Every respected professional reference. All carried the same name. Meghan Bennett. The daughter he had introduced for years as a pathetic dropout. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the phone. He opened his mouth to speak. Claire, I think there's been. She gently raised one hand. No. Her voice remained calm. I'm not finished. Claire lowered the microphone and looked around the ballroom. I've listened for the last 10 minutes while people called Meghan a failure. No one spoke. I think everyone deserves to know one more thing. She turned toward me. When my father's company was under investigation, every advisor told us to prepare for bankruptcy. Her father nodded. They weren't wrong. He stepped forward. My company had nearly 400 employees. He looked across the room before continuing. If we had lost that case, every one of them would have lost their jobs. He faced me. Miss Bennett refused to promise us miracles. She promised us only one thing. I'll follow the evidence wherever it leads. He smiled. She kept that promise. The room erupted into applause. Not the polite applause people offer out of courtesy. The kind earned through genuine respect. Several senior attorneys approached me. One introduced himself as a managing partner from a national litigation firm. We've relied on your investigative work for years. Another laughed softly. I've quoted one of your fraud reconstruction reports during continuing legal education seminars. A retired judge shook my hand. I always wondered who was behind those investigations. I never imagined she was standing in this room. Each conversation made my father's posture sink a little lower. For decades, Richard Bennett had believed courtroom victories defined success. Now he was surrounded by legal professionals honoring the daughter he had dismissed without ever learning what she had become. Andrew finally found his voice. Meghan. He stepped closer. I didn't know. I looked at him calmly. No. You never wanted to. He stopped walking. There was nothing to argue with. Because it was true. My father slowly approached next. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain. I made mistakes. I didn't answer immediately. He glanced around the ballroom. His colleagues weren't watching me anymore. They were watching him. Watching the man who had publicly called his own daughter a pathetic college dropout only minutes before discovering she was one of the most respected forensic investigators in the room. I should have asked why you left, he said quietly. Instead, his voice faltered. I decided I already knew. I nodded once. You did. But you were wrong. Silence settled between us. Not angry. Final. After a long moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. If you're willing, I'd like us to talk. I looked at the card, then back at him. For 8 years, I said evenly, you never wondered whether I was alive, happy, or struggling. You only wanted to speak to me after everyone else told you I was successful. His shoulders fell. He knew there was no honest response. I handed the card back. I spent years believing I needed my family's approval. I smiled, not out of triumph but peace. Then I realized something. Respect that disappears when your circumstances change was never respect to begin with. My father lowered his hand. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Andrew looked down at the floor. His wife quietly slipped her hand into his, but neither of them spoke. Their confidence had disappeared long before the reception resumed. Claire walked over and hugged me. Thank you for coming. I almost didn't. I'm very glad you did. So am I. I congratulated Claire and Andrew on their marriage sincerely. Whatever had happened between my family and me, their wedding deserved to continue without more conflict. As I made my way toward the exit, several attorneys asked for my contact information. Others invited me to future legal conferences and corporate fraud symposiums. The same legal community my family believed had no place for me welcomed me with genuine admiration. I accepted a few invitations, thanked everyone for their kindness, and stepped outside into the cool evening air. Over the following months, my father called several times. He left voicemails, sent letters, even asked mutual acquaintances if I would meet him. I wished him well each time through polite replies, but I never reopened the relationship. Some doors don't close because of one mistake. They close because of years of deliberate choices. Instead, I poured my energy into mentoring young investigators, especially those who believed their dreams had ended because life forced them off the path they originally planned. I wanted them to understand what I hadn't known at 26. One closed door doesn't define your future. The people who judge you by the path you leave behind rarely notice the one you're brave enough to build. The day my family finally recognized my worth wasn't the day I became successful. It was the day they realized they had rejected someone they had never truly taken the time to know.